So you want to know the difference between Odinism and Asatru religions? Alright, you filthy fucking heathen. Buckle up for a wild ride to the Norse pantheon's backyard, where we're gonna sling some mud, crack some skulls, and figure out what the fuck Odinism and Asatru are all about. These two are like the drunk cousins at the Viking family reunion, related, but one's probably getting off in the mead hall, while the other's setting fire to the longship. So let's dive into this pagan shit show with maximum vulgarity and unhinged energy, because I'm here to make your brain explode with knowledge and your soul scream for a battle axe. First off, Odinism and Asatru are both modern revivals of ancient Norse paganism, worshipping gods like Odin, Thor, and Freya, who are basically the badass avengers of the Viking world. They're all about honoring the Aesir and the Vanir, the two main god squads, drinking mead like it's their job, and maybe sacrificing a goat or two, though nowadays it's more like sacrificing a six-pack to the recycling bin. But these two paths split, like a frost giant skull under a warhammer, and the difference between them come down to focus, vibe, and who's waving their dick around trying to claim authenticity. So what about Odinism? Odinism's the one-eyed warlord's fetish cult. It's like black metal skull-crushing, I'm gonna fuck the universe version of Norse paganism. It's hyper-focused on Odin, the All-Father, who's basically a cosmic warlord with a fetish for wisdom, war, and poetry. This guy hung himself on a tree for 9 days, stabbed out his own damn eye for a sip of magical knowledge, and probably gets off the sound of ravens cawing. Odinism leans hard into his vibe, think, martial, mystical, and a little unhinged, like a Viking berserker, chugging Red Bull and chanting runes. Odinists are often all about self-improvement through struggle, esoteric knowledge, and being the alpha wolf in a pack of wannabe warriors. They'll quote the Have 'em All, Odin's ancient TED Talk, while bench pressing a longship and screaming about blood and soil like they're auditioning for a Wagner opera. Problem is, Odinism's got a dark side. Some of its followers are straight up white supremacist fuckwads who twist it into some preserve the Nordic race circle jerk. These dipshits think Thor's hammer is a dog whistle for their neo-Nazi bullshit, which is about as authentic as a plastic Viking helmet from Party City, right? Real Odinists, though, just want to chase wisdom, fuck shit up in a poetic way, and maybe shove a rune-carved dildo up their ass to commune with the Allfather. Insane? Sure. But it's their jam. Asatru. The chill pagan block party Asatru, on the other hand, is like the Coachella of Norse paganism. More inclusive, less likely to punch you in the face, but still fucking weird. The name Asatru literally means faith in the Aesir, the main Norse gods. And it's a broader, more community-focused religion that worships the whole pantheon, not just Odin's moody ass. You've got Thor swinging his hammer, Freya riding her cat chariot and fucking everyone's brains out, and Loki causing chaos like a divine prankster with a hard-on for anarchy. Asatru is about balance, honoring gods, ancestors, and nature spirits, while living a life of honor, hospitality, and not being a total douche. Asatru folks love their rituals, called blots, where they pour mead, chant, and maybe slaughter a metaphorical pig, or a real one if they're feeling extra. It's less about Odin's lone wolf edgelord energy, and more about building a tribe, telling epic stories, and keeping the old ways alive without being a gatekeeping prick. Asatru's also got a rep for being more progressive. Lots of groups welcome anyone who vibes, regardless of race, gender, or whether you've got a foot fetish for Freya's divine toes. But don't get it twisted. Some Asatrus are still hardcore traditionalists. Who'll argue for 8 hours about the correct way to carve a rune, while secretly fisting themselves with mead-soaked enthusiasm. So what are the key differences between Odinism and Asatru? Well, let's break this shit down. Focus. Odinism is Odin's fan club war Focus. Odinism is Odin's fan club, war wisdom, and mystical dick measuring contests. Asatru's a group hug for all the Norse gods, with a side of let's not fuck up the earth vibe. Odinism's got that I'm gonna conquer Valhalla with my bare hands energy, while Asatru's like, pass the mead, let's sing about Thor's goats and chillin' shit. Politics. Odinism's got a nasty history of attracting skinhead losers who think Vikings are the Aryan poster boys. Asatru's more likely to tell those fuckers to shove their swastikas up their asses and fuck off. Rituals. Odinists might go full method actor, starving themselves in the woods to channel Odin's suffering. Asatrurs are throwing a backyard barbecue with runes, toast, and maybe a guy in a kilt humping a ceremonial hammer. Who knows? Accessibility. Odinism can feel like a secret club for wannabe warlords. And Asatru's got a bigger tent, welcoming hippies, metalheads, and nerds who just read Neil Gaiman's Norse. I cannot talk. Asatru's got a bigger tent, welcoming hippies, metalheads, and nerds who just read Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology and want in. Hot take. Why this matters, or doesn't, who gives a flying fuck which one's true to the Vikings? Both are modern inventions. Nobody's out here raiding Lindisfarne or navigating by the stars anymore. Odinism's for the tryhards who want to live like they're starring in a gritty Viking reboot, while Asatru's for folks who just want to vibe with the gods and not be dicks about it. The real tea? Ancient Norse pagans didn't have a rule book. They made shit up as they went. Fucked their neighbors and prayed to whoever answered. So, pick up your poison, shove a horn of mead up your ass, and scream skull into the void. Insane idea. The ultimate Odinism versus Asatru showdown. Picture this. Insane idea. The ultimate Odinism versus Asatru showdown. Picture this. A no-holds-barred pagan death match in a muddy Scandinavian forest. Odinist on one side, shirtless, covered in runes, getting off to the poetic Edda and swinging battle axes. Asatrurs, on the other hand, half drunk on mead, waving Thor's hammers and blasting Amon Amarth. The gods themselves show up. Odin's riding his 8-legged horse, Sleipnir. Freya's got a chariot pulled by cats with raging boners, and Loki's just throwing Molotov cocktails for the lulz. Winner gets to rewrite the have-em-all and claim the title of Supreme Heathen Badass. Losers have to shove a replica of Mjolnir up their asses and sing Baby Shark in Old Norse. Broadcast it on pay-per-view, call it Valhalla Vendetta, and watch the world burn. So you ready to pick a side, you glorious fuck, or do you just want to sit there jerking off to the idea of Thor's sweaty abs? Let me know what's next, because this pagan party is just getting started. Now, if you want more of a deep dive into Odinism and Asatru, you can look it up for yourself. But some of the main points of Odinism is that these two religions, Odinism and Asatru, they're both modern revivals of pre-Christian Germanic paganism, and they're both rooted in Norse mythology and worship gods like Odin, Thor, and Freya, but they differ in focus, practice, and historical development. So this is going to be more of a more serious breakdown of what the religions are. I just had to do the other thing for an icebreaker. So, focus and philosophy. Odinism. It often emphasizes Odin as the central deity with a strong focus on ancestral heritage, tribal identity, and warrior virtues like honor and courage. Some Odinist groups lean toward ethnocentrism or exclusivity, though not all. Asatru takes a broader approach, honoring the entire Norse pantheon and focusing on community, nature, and spiritual balance. And it tends to be more inclusive and universalist and welcoming more diverse practitioners. The historical development for Odinism emerged in the early 20th century, particularly in the U.S. and Europe, often tied to romanticized views of Viking culture. It was formalized by figures like Christensen in the 1960s, who blended Norse paganism with folkish ideals. Asatru originated in Iceland in the 1970s as a formalized religion recognized by the government in 1973. It was shaped by figures like Svanborn Beinteinson. Okay, whatever the fuck. Dude, get a different name. We'll just call him Seven Ben. Emphasizing reconstruction of ancient practices from texts like the Eddas and the Sagas. Practice and rituals. Odinism practices may focus heavily on Odin-specific rituals, runes, and esoteric mysticism. Some groups incorporate folkish or nationalistic elements, though others are purely spiritual. So think more of a kind of a magical thinker. Asatru rituals are more standardized, including blots, which are offerings, symbols, which are toasting ceremonies, and seasonal festivals like Yule. It often draws directly from historical sources and emphasizes community gatherings. Okay. Inclusivity. Historically, some Odinist groups have been associated with ethnocentric or white supremacist ideologies, tying the practice to a perceived ancestral or racial identity. However, not all Odinists share this view, and inclusive Odinist groups exist. History. The term predates Asatru in some contexts, used by early 20th century groups like those influenced by figures like Alexander Mills. It's less standardized than Asatru and often overlaps with fringe or folkish movements. And the key differences between Odinism and Asatru is one, scope of worship. Asatru is broadly polytheistic. Odinism prioritizes Odin. 2. Cultural stance. Asatru is generally more inclusive and community-oriented. Odinism can be more individualistic and, in some cases, tied to ethnocentric views. 3. Historical context. Asatru is more structured, modern revival. Odinism has older roots but is less cohesive, with some branches tied to controversial ideologies. I swear to God, I'm going to. Controversial ideologies. Both draw from the same mythological sources, but their interpretations and communities diverge. Always research specific groups and beliefs and practices vary widely. Always research specific groups because their beliefs and their practices can vary widely. Now, there has been the topic of human sacrifice associated with Odinism. So some people have asked, is that true? Well, human sacrifice is historically associated with pre-Christian Norse religion. That is true, including practices that could be linked to Odin, but its connection to modern Odinism is more complex. So here's a more concise explanation. In the historical context, for pre-Christian Norse religion, the evidence, archaeological finds, like the bog bodies, the Talmud Man, and textual sources, suggest human sacrifice occurred in Germanic and Norse paganism, particularly in extreme circumstances like war, famine, or major rituals. Odin's role. Odin, as a god of war, death, and wisdom, was linked to sacrificial practices in some sources. The poetic Edda and sagas describe rituals like hanging or spearing victims, mirroring Odin's self-sacrifice on the world tree. Frequency. Human sacrifice was likely rare, reserved for significant events, and not a routine practice. Animal sacrifices like horses and pigs were more common in blots. How this ties into modern Odinism? There's no human sacrifice. Modern Odinism, as a revival or reconstruction of Norse paganism, does not practice or endorse human sacrifice. It's a spiritual or cultural movement that operates within contemporary legal and ethical frameworks, although how legal and how ethical, that's going to be up to each individual, focusing on rituals like offerings, food and drink, runic work, or Odin-centric worship. Symbolic interpretation. Some Odinists interpret historical sacrifices symbolically, using mead, food, or personal dedication in rituals to honor Odin's themes of sacrifice and transformation. Controversial groups, and this is where shit gets serious. Fringe Odinist groups with ethnocentric or extremist ideologies may romanticize Viking-era violence, including sacrifice, but this is not representative of mainstream Odinism or Asatru. Such views are often criticized by inclusive pagan communities. So the key point to all this, while human sacrifice was part of the historical Norse practices that inform Odinism roots, it has no place in modern Odinism. Practitioners today adapt ancient traditions to modern values, focusing on spiritual or symbolic acts. Always approach specific Odinist groups critically because their beliefs vary widely in these different groups. Okay, so now we're getting down to the nuts and bolts. Why were the Odinist groups associated with the Delphi, Indiana murders? Some people say that the association comes down to a defense theory proposed by attorneys for Richard Allen. He was the guy that was charged for the 2017 murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. So, in case you don't know, if you've been living under a rock, the background of the case, on February 13, 2017, Abby and Libby were killed while hiking on the Monan High Bridge in Delphi, Indiana. Their bodies were found the next day in a wooded area with their throats slit. Richard Allen was arrested in October 2022 and charged with their murders, linked by evidence, they said, like a bullet allegedly tied to his gun. So, in September 2023, Allen's defense attorneys filed a 136-page memorandum claiming that Abby and Libby were ritualistic sacrificed by members of an Odinist group, described as a pagan Norse religion hijacked by white nationalists. They argued Allen had no connection to Odinism or any cult, and that the real killers were Odinists from two groups, one near Delphi and another near Rushville, Indiana. Now, is that true? Is that where this originally came from, was the defense? Because there are... Is that where this really came from, the defense? Well, that's what you hear in the media. That's what you hear about really, though, it was the prosecution, not the defense, that investigated the Delphi murders to ties to Odinists. So it's inaccurate to say that this theory originated with the defense team of Richard Allen. So the prosecution, along with law enforcement, did investigate potential ties to Odinists early in the case. So, there needs to be a little clarification of the Odinism investigation. So early in the investigation, 2017 to 2018, following the murders of Abby and Libby, law enforcement, including the Indiana State Police and the FBI, explored multiple leads, including a possible connection to Odinism. Court documents indicate that investigators consulted a Purdue University professor by February 2018 to assess potential pagan symbols at the crime scene, such as sticks and branches arranged over the girls' bodies. The professor supposedly concluded that the scene did not indicate Odinism or cult activity. That's coming from lead investigator State Trooper Jerry Holman. And he said that the professor said that it was not Odinism or any type of cult worshipping that was responsible for the crime. So, we can see there that early on it was investigated by the prosecution, including seeking out the Purdue professor. So, what would be the evidence of any type of sacrificial ritual or anything like that tied to the deaths? Well, an FBI agent's March 2017 search warrant request noted that the girls' bodies appeared moved and staged, which prompted speculation about ritualistic elements. The defense later cited this as evidence of Odinism signatures. But did they really? I believe it was Robert Ives, the DA at the time, who has since been replaced by Nick McLeland, who was the DA on this case. But it was Robert Ives that had said that there were evidence of non-secular signatures, which tells me there were things left there that specifically tied this to a ritual killing. Law enforcement's initial exploration of this theory predates the defense's claims. Then there are other investigators' beliefs. Some investigators, like... So, the defense's rule, they just revived the theory and was asking, hey, why do we not have any discovery on this Odinism theory that you guys were tossing around? So, while the prosecution and law enforcement initially investigated Odinism, the theory was largely set aside after 2018, mainly because Jerry Holman said, the Purdue professor said it was not tied to any type of ritual sacrifice or Odinism. And so, Baldwin and Rossi revived and amplified the Odinism theory in a September 18, 2023, 136-page memorandum, where they argued that Abby and Libby were ritualistic sacrificed by Odinists, specifically white nationalist groups, and accused law enforcement of suppressing related evidence. And that's a harsh way of putting that they put in the Franks memo. There's evidence that we do not have here, that you guys investigated a ritual sacrifice by Odinists. We don't have any of that. Can we please have it? And then, yes, they accused law enforcement of suppressing related evidence because the defense claimed the investigators ignored an obscene amount of evidence linking Odinism to the crime scene, such as the arrangement of the sticks, they resembled runes, and the positioning of Libby's body, and which they had compared to Odin's mythological sacrifice, while they also named specific individuals like Brad Holder and Patrick Westphal as potential Odinist suspects, citing social media posts and alleged confessions. The defense's filing framed the Odinism theory as a central pillar of their case, alleging that law enforcement's failure to pursue it was confounding, and that evidence was buried in discovery. So, what evidence that they did have, which was basically nothing, I believe they had one page stating something about it, but there was nothing else. So they were kind of like, what does this go to? And then they found out. So, that's where they're saying, hey, where's the rest of this? And so, the prosecution's response was that this theory was unfounded and speculative, and he argued that the defense failed to place any alleged Odinists at the crime scene on February 13, 2017. He emphasized that the police investigated and cleared suspects like Brad Holder, noting they had alibis, and that Holder's landfill work records showed he clocked out at 2:45 p.m., potentially inconsistent with the murder timeline. So the prosecution sought to bar the Odinism theory from trial, calling it more of a distraction. And on September 4th, 2024, the special judge assigned to the case, Judge Francis Skull, ruled that the defense could not present the theory to the jury, citing insufficient admissible evidence linking Odinists or specific suspects to the killings. This ruling was upheld despite defense appeals. So, again, why the prosecution did not follow through with the investigation was because there was a misattribution that occurred. The defense's high-profile 2023 filing and their repeated emphasis on Odinism in court documents and hearings, with expert Don Perlmutter's testimony about textbook ritualistic murder, drew significant media attention, overshadowing the prosecution's earlier investigation. Outlets like NBC News, USA Today, and Court TV often frame the theory as the defense's narrative, contributing to the perception that it had originated with them. But the defense's claim that law enforcement abandoned or hid Odinist evidence implied they were uncovering a neglected theory, further tying it to their strategy in public perception. So, the defense basically, like I said before, like, you guys investigated this and then just dropped it. And we didn't know anything about it. You didn't give us any discovery about any of these third-party subjects and what you investigated, why you considered them suspects in the first place or persons of interest. And so the the reason why it was dropped in the first place was because Holman said that Professor Turco of Purdue University did not believe that the Delphi murder scene to be associated with pagan ritual sacrifice. And he specifically said it did show ties to Odinism. It was Officer Jerry Holman that said the professor claimed there was no ties to Odinism, but in trial, or a pre-trial hearing, Jerry Holman had to acknowledge he was wrong. Well, was he wrong? Or was he purposely misleading? Was this a willful deceit? Was he being deceitful, do you think? So, yes, Professor Jeffrey Turco, his explanation of what he believed he saw in connection with Odinism in the crime scene was that he believed that there was something there. And because of Holman's misinterpretation, that's what caused everybody to look the other way. But what Professor Turco, what his position was originally, he said, these are Turco's actual statements. Jeffrey Turco, a Purdue University professor with expertise in Norse and Germanic folklore, was consulted by investigators no later than February 2018 regarding potential pagan symbols at the crime scene where Abigail Williams and Liberty German were found, murdered on February 14, 2017. In a September 19, 2023 interview with Indiana State Police, Turco stated that he could certainly imagine that this was somebody's idea, that when you do a human sacrifice, you carve runes, and that there are some poetic sources that would sort of support that idea that somebody might have come across that scenario, and it seems entirely plausible to him. He further noted that runes have magical significance and would be used in incantations and in rituals, and that there is a sacrificial connection in mythological poetry that an Odinist fanboy might draw upon. These statements suggest Turco found the crime scene's elements, like the arrangements of sticks and branches, consistent with a possible Odinist ritual interpretation. Contrary to early claims, Turco did not rule out Odinism or cult activity. His 2023 interview confirmed he saw a plausible link to Odinist practices, particularly if someone was inspired by Norse mythological themes of sacrifice and runes. Okay, so where did Trooper Jerry Holman's misrepresentation come from? Well, that would be let's see, Jerry Holman. Jerry Van Hole. Let's go down to see what he says. Because he said that Turco had concluded that this was not Odinism or any type of cult worshipping, not Odinism or any type of cult worshipping or any type of group that would have conducted the crime. This led to the Odinism theory being largely abandoned by law enforcement by March 2017. Okay, that's weird. Because I thought they were still investigating it by March of 2018. Well, anyway. So then the defense discovered all of this. They claimed Holman's statements were inaccurate and that the prosecution failed to provide a report or identify who this professor even was until they were pressed hard about it. On September 6, 2023, prosecutor Nicholas McClellan emailed the defense stating they were unable to identify the Purdue professor, reinforcing the narrative that Turco's input was lost or unclear. So they didn't remember who this professor was or what he had really stated, except for he didn't see any ties to Odinism. So there was an acknowledgement by Holman. On September 19, 2023, Holman located and re-interviewed Turco, whose statements directly contradicted Holman's earlier claims. The defense noted that Holman had been working to set up this interview for weeks, suggesting he was aware of Turco's identity despite McClellan's claim otherwise. So there seems to be a lot of this that has gone on with like Holman and then others involved with the investigation. Like, he'll say something, somebody else will say something that kind of contradicts that, but then it just goes away. And just drops, and nobody looks into it. But in court documents filed October 3rd, 2023, the defense argued that Holman and Carroll County Sheriff's Deputy Tony Liggett had intentionally concealed Turco's actual findings, which supported the Odinism theory. During pretrial hearings, Holman acknowledged his error in misrepresenting Turco's conclusions, admitting that Turco had not dismissed the Odinism as he had previously stated. And here's the impact. The defense used this discrepancy to argue that law enforcement suppressed evidence of Odinist involvement, claiming Holman's misrepresentation and the delayed disclosure of Turco's 2023 interview, delivered on a thumb drive on September 27th, 2023, marked only with Turco's name, were part of a broader effort to focus on Allen as the sole suspect. So, there were 3 law enforcement agents originally investigating this Odinism theory. And one was Rushville Assistant Police Chief Todd Click, and another was an FBI agent, Greg Ferenczi, and there was another officer by the last name of Murphy, I believe. Anyway, so as early as February 2017, the prosecution had been investigating due to the way the crime scene looked, with the sticks and the branches arranged over the girls' bodies, and then Libby's blood used to paint what looked like a rune on a tree, and Abby's body positioned with supposedly faux antlers made of branches. An FBI agent's March 2017 search warrant noted the bodies were moved and staged, prompting that initial consultation with Turco, the Purdue professor. Now, so you would think that, well, there's something there that ties these other parties to the crime, because Richard Allen didn't know anything about Odinism. Well, since the defense was saying it looked like a ritualistic sacrifice by white nationalist Odinists, and they used Turco's 2023 interview and the crime scene details and social media posts by Odinists, like Brad Holder, as evidence, they wanted to include that as a direct connection to these third parties, that they possibly committed the crime, or it's not out of the realm of possibility. Well, the court ruling on September 4th, 2024, by Special Judge Francis Gull barred the defense from presenting the Odinism theory at trial, ruling that they failed to provide admissible evidence linking Odinists or named suspects to the crime scene on February 13th, 2017. Despite Turco's statements, the lack of concrete evidence tying specific individuals to the murders led to the theory's exclusion. But there was direct evidence as well that Judge Gull also dismissed. One of those was someone who was supposedly taken into one of these groups, one of these social groups. He came out and specifically stated he was there that day on the bridge. He saw Abby and Libby. They killed them. He spit on one of them and even told an officer later, I believe it was on the second day, like the day after they found the girls that evening, had stated, now, if they find my DNA on one of the girls, but I can explain it away, will I still be in trouble? Now, imagine you're hearing some guy say this. You're going to be like, what? Are you jacking with me or what? Because that's what Murphy said at first. He had thought this guy, his name was Elvis Fields, he thought he was, yanking his chain a little bit. And then he got to thinking about it and was like, that dude was telling the truth. So he went and they investigated this further. So he was one of them that was originally on the first investigations. Now, like I said, Holman went to the Purdue University guy because it did look like the Odinism thing, and he said that Purdue University professor had said, nope, no ties. Nothing to see here, move on along. When really, Holman and Liggett were basically obstructing justice. When you interfere with evidence like that, I mean, that's evidence tampering. You're making evidence go away. Some of your evidence that you've uncovered, you're making it go away. And then when they dropped the investigation, well, of course, then they got to start looking at somebody else, right? Even though there's all these other people there on the trail that day, they start looking at Richard Allen. So this initial misrepresentation, it all stemmed from Holman's statements. Those statements were repeated in court documents and media reports. Media like WTHR and WNDU, it was repeated until the defense uncovered Turco's actual position in 2023, and the early reports like citing Holman's claim that Turco dismissed Odinism created a false narrative that Turco found no link to pagan rituals. That's false testimony. That's falsely testifying about a witness's statement. So, I don't think Judge Cole had a problem with that. Apparently she didn't. I mean, she heard all of it. She heard all the evidence. The defense's October 3rd, 2023 filing clarified that Turco's findings were misrepresented, and Holman's acknowledgement during pretrial hearings corrected the record. However, the media coverage often focused on the defense's sensational claims, overshadowing the nuance of Turco's actual statements. So, for some reason, the media wanted to glom onto this, the defense theory of Odinism. Look how crazy it is. Oh, everybody, there's Odinists running around. They're going to sacrifice your children. I mean, come on. Is that what we're doing now? I guess so. Is that why the legacy media is not getting much in the way of subscriptions and readers, and because they're not really reporting what's going down? You took it upon yourself, you as in legacy media, you took it upon yourself to take what an officer's words were for the gospel truth. And we all know that officers can lie. They're human like everybody else. So we have to investigate that shit, right? You gotta look into it a little bit instead of just taking somebody's word for it, right? I mean, did you just take Richard Allen's word for it that, well, I wasn't there when the crime occurred? No, you didn't. So what's going on here? Why are we purposely not checking out the facts about things and only accepting what law enforcement is telling us? That probably needs to be looked into, do you think? Because that makes you a state actor rather than an intermediary for the authorities and the public. So you're not living up to your role. So, the conclusion to all this is that it's inaccurate to state that Professor Jeffrey Turco did not believe the Delphi murder scene was associated with pagan ritual sacrifice. He explicitly indicated in his 2023 interview that the crime scene's elements like runes and stage branches were plausibly tied to Odinist rituals based on Norse mythological themes. Trooper Jerry Holman misrepresented, oh my God, Turco's findings by claiming he dismissed Odinism. An error Holman acknowledged during pretrial hearings about the Odinism theory being rejected by Turco. That just did not happen. Lots of things Jerry Holman says just did not happen. But he's going to make it happen. Jerry Holman, he's going to make fetch happen no matter what. He's out there making fetch happen. So, this clarifies Turco's expertise pointed out a potential Odinist link. It also points out Holman misreported what he had said. It also points out all of this was rectified by the defense. All of this was brought out by the defense. The hiding of information, the hiding of evidence, hiding of the professor's name, and this would seem to indicate tampering with evidence. obstruction of justice. So, what exactly is your role, Jerry Holman? Are you the Loki of the Odinist boys up there? I mean, I had heard something like on Murder Sheet was laughing about, this Odinism theory and all of that and how crazy it was. And, oh, the bullet, the magic bullet, what the defense called the magic bullet. Like, are they saying that an Odinist police officer just dropped a bullet there? Well, you know what? That appears to be something that you might want to look into, right? Since we found all this other fuckery that went on with this investigation? Do you think you might want to look into that a little bit? Regarding Brad Holder and Patrick Westphal. These are two people that were looked into by this original investigation. The first few days, few weeks, few months of the investigation, they were, searching out people that were involved in Odinism and could they possibly be connected. And they found that old Brad Holder had posted some pictures on his Facebook page, which I'm going to include here. This picture shows a painting he drew of Odin. After Odin stabbed out his own damn eye and all that, hung himself on the tree for 9 days. Okay, what happened here? You have a painting that a supposed Odinist did, or someone who has claims or ties to Odinism. You have a painting that he did of Odin hanging from the tree. Well, if you look at Odin, he's hanging upside down with one leg crossed. This is, according to Dawn Perlmutter, an FBI expert on ritual sacrifices and someone who's looked into these groups. She claims this is an actual pretty famous painting. Of course, Brad's is not. Brad's is a copy of this famous painting. She said, but in this well-known painting, Odin's other leg is crossed. It's always the other leg. Kind of like the hanging man on the tarot card. The other leg is hanging down and crossed back behind the other leg. Well, this is the position that Abby's body was in. She was laying there in that position, like the hanging man on the tarot card, except for she had the opposite leg tucked up back behind the other leg, which is exactly like the painting that Holder drew. Or the painting that he painted. It's a mirror image of the correct way that Odin was portrayed. So, Abby, the way she's laying there, that is a mirror image of that correct way that's also seen in the tarot card. Which leg is tucked up behind the other leg. So that was something that drew significance into looking at Brad Holder even more. In fact, the FBI said, I know you guys said you interviewed this guy. You guys need to go back and look into him again.
So there were a couple of other things I was going to load onto here, and we were going to discuss, like Officer Page found a Jimmy John's cup, a Red Bull, or not a Red Bull, but an energy drink, and there was some Camel cigarettes left at the crime scene. And this is the CSI guy testifying, and he said he does not know if these items were bagged and tagged and brought in and tested to see if there was any DNA on these items or not. So, you got to be shitting me, right? Like everything else in this investigation. So, there you have it. Anyway, I just thought it was interesting that there was this investigation into the Odinism, and I went through a lot of that detail with you and what the Franks had said, the Franks memo, and you can read the Franks for yourself. It's pretty interesting. It does give a lot more detail, and you can look into day 3 if you go to Andrea Burkhart's YouTube channel, where it says trial day 3. When Officer Page is testifying, he is testifying about the DNA items, the other DNA items that they found at the scene that they did not test, which is all pretty interesting. And I do think that that bullet that they found looks a lot more like the bullet that Brad Holder posted in his Facebook post than it does of Richard Allen's ammo in the exhibit photo that they showed, which, like I said, those photos suck. Somebody needs to hire somebody else to do those photos, because if you're looking at stuff, you want to look at the details, especially in a trial. And if you can't make out what's the purpose of the photo? You're just wasting everybody's time. So, whatever. Nobody's got time to be jerked around. Just do it right, figure it out. So I had to do this way tonight so I could talk to people in the chat, because I'm not really set up to be able to talk to people in the chat and do a live at the same time. So I just did the premiere. So until next time, thanks for dropping by, and I hope it was a lot better than last night. Maybe I'm getting there. I don't know. So I'll see you at the next one, if I don't screw this one up too royal. So thanks for dropping by, and thanks for watching. Good night.